Dominique Strauss-Kahn returned home to France on Sunday for the first time in 4 months. The former International Monetary Fund chief left the U.S. 2 weeks after criminal charges were dropped in his alleged sexual attack on a New York hotel maid. Strauss-Kahn may be free, but the political future of the man who many expected to be France's next president is still under a cloud. And joining us from Paris this morning is journalist Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. Anne-Elisabeth, good morning.
Good morning, Jeff.
Good to have you here. So there's talk of DSK doing this primetime television interview, possibly explaining himself. What might we hear in that?
I have no idea how it's going to do, and ideally the journalist who should have interviewed him in the tradition of French television would have been his own wife, and of course that's not going to happen. I'm not sure it's a good move on his part. I don't think the French will go so much for the confessional, and also he is minded to say that he was unjustly accused from start to finish, and I think too much came out about his private life for the people to take this entirely at face value.
Anne-Elisabeth, how much has the opinion of DSK changed inside France from the time he was arrested to now?
I think it is interesting because the first reaction was to say, what are these Americans doing to our man? And the swiftness of the American justice process in both ways, in the way he was arrested and in the way the charges were dropped, is something that fascinated the French. But at the same time, he has come out as somebody whose private life ought to have been reported by the press because it impacted his public life. And he's also come out as being incredibly rich, which in this country, which has an old Catholic tradition, is not something that people like, especially in the socialist candidate. Nicolas Sarkozy suffered for years of being called the bling president, but all of this falls when you look at the fortune of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, the $50,000 a month townhouse, the $600 evening pasta, that sort of thing. So it blurred his image as a viable socialist candidate. And then in serious newspapers, in the newspaper Record, Le Monde, you had stories about his sex life that frankly were a bit shocking.
And has it changed the landscape, talking about that just beyond DSK? Because there was a lot of talk throughout this case that the sex scandals were treated differently in America versus France. Do the French look at these differently now?
I would say that they look at it a bit differently in general, but French women look at it very differently, because the one fascinating thing and what will lastingly remain of the Strauss-Kahn thing was the fact that French women basically stood up and said, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And by this I mean not only Dominique Strauss-Kahn himself, but the attitude of men in power, men in politics, men in the corporate world, men in the civil service. And what was fascinating is you found women left to right, from Marine Le Pen to the former socialist Communist Party leader, who's a woman. All of them were in full agreement with cabinet ministers, all saying there is sexism in French political life, there is sexism in French public life, and we don't like it, and it can't go on like this.
But not Anne Sinclair. She is still firmly by her husband's side, correct? She
is extremely firmly by her husband's side, and suddenly she's looking old-fashioned in a way that is not necessarily a good way.
Last question. Any chance at all right now that DSK still runs for president?
I would say none at all. I can't even see him in a cabinet assuming that the socialist candidate wins. The only possibility for him to be brought back in the political fray would be if we had another economic crisis of massive importance, and then there would be a cabinet of all the talents, and he might be brought back specifically for his financial expertise, which at no moment was put in doubt.
Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, good to see you again. Thanks again.